So this is the consistent problem for me. Can you go over eliminating answer choices? Well, so I think it would be helpful if we can have an example, because different questions are different, right? The inference questions are a little bit harder. Some of the other detail-oriented ones require literally going back to the passage. Ultimately, what we want to know is we want to know what the author thinks. And I think when you go into some of the passages and you have an opinion about something, you have to sort of separate your opinion and really look at what the author is saying and what the author's opinion is in order to extrapolate what an inference would be from what the author is saying, not from what I think. What do I infer from myself would be different than what the author would want me to infer. So um, I can't really for how to eliminate answer choices, Kimberly, unless you give me a specific example. There's no hard and fast rule. I do think, I guess I could say usually the more extreme answers are less likely to be correct. If you see very extreme words in the answers, they're more likely to be wrong. And I think you get used to, or you sort of start to see patterns, and you can start eliminating pretty quickly down to a couple of answers. The good news is there's only 4 options. There's not 5 options. So if you can eliminate even 2 possible answers, then you have a 50-50 shot of getting it correct, even if you don't know which one is right. Um, Remember, this is always best answer. Just like any other multiple choice question, it's best answer. I noticed that on some of the ballet one, how long should we take to read these passages and answer each question? Okay, I'll answer that in a second. Like on the ballet one, I noticed there's a couple of answers that were wrong, but one answer was definitely better than the other. So again, make sure you read all the answer options, definitely, because I think I mentioned this last time, that when I give questions in my biochemistry course here, I find that sometimes if the best answer is last, students don't even read it and wrong. So make sure you're reading every answer choice. That's the most I can say generally until we go into a more specific thing. So how long should we to read each passage and answer each question? So what I would do is when you're doing a practice section, Kaplan book, for example, they have a certain number of passages. Usually there's somewhere between 7 and 8 passages, and you have a certain amount of time. And I would divide that by the amount of time and figure out how much time you have for each passage, not just reading it, but also doing the questions. So you do have to frankly get through them pretty quickly. At the same time, you will read for structure and read constantly thinking about why the author has written the passage. What is the art the author is trying to make? What's the author's opinion about the topic that they're talking about? Are they being are they promoting something? Are they trying to dissuade you from something? Like how would you summarize the author's opinion about it? And that will help you answer some of the questions in general. How long do you take? I told you last week that as you're working your way up to getting really on top of this section, assuming that, I know there were some people raised their hand who were like, oh, I love this section. And, if you're at that point and you love it and you're doing really well on sections, you should be doing them timed. If, on the other hand, you're kind of in the more common pool of science-oriented folks who find this section a little bit obtuse and hard to understand or hard to kind of wrap your mind around, I would say start by allowing yourself to take as much time as necessary in order to get the questions right. I want you to take whatever time is necessary to see the nuances and understand the nuances, because if you're just skimming through and not allowing yourself the time to find those nuances when you're first starting and trying to get this, then you're never going to be able to speed yourself up with accuracy. So you said there's 9, and I think you have 90 minutes, so roughly 10 minutes per passage. Hannah, I will take your word for that. I don't know the exact number of minutes in each section. So I would defer to you as well as the folks in the MPP program. I'm sure they're much more aware of the format of the current MCAT in terms of timing than I would be. I certainly know the content, but the timing, I'll defer to them. Okay, so it seems like there's no questions on this section that I posted the answers for. Am I correct? So move on to the new section. So this is the one about the San Francisco Ballet. So how would you summarize what you think this is about? What are they saying in this passage? And you're going to have to go into the chat pool here in order to answer the question. So how would you summarize this? Remember, we talked about topic, scope, and purpose of the passage. So Janelle says outdated ballet requirements. Okay. Does it start that way though? I think it kind of ends that way, Janelle. I think it ends by saying the author's opinion is that it's out, that some of, you know, that it's outdated. Okay. So Margarita says San Francisco Ballet School is unique but updated. I think you meant maybe outdated. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, he talks a lot about, the author talks a lot about Balanchine, so I probably need to put that in there as well. So this, because he's equating the San Francisco Ballet School with what they're teaching, which is the Balanchine method. So I think it's more than just about the San Francisco Ballet School, but it's about Balanchine. And I think you're right. I think so. It's basically this idea that the San Francisco Ballet School teaches Balanchine method, which might be outdated. So I'm just adding Balanchine in there because I think Balanchine is pretty central to the argument that the author's making. Discrimination, somebody else says, yeah, I mean, I think that's implied that there's discrimination. Certainly the person who brought the lawsuit was basically claiming that there was discrimination as a result of the height and weight requirement that they're trying to put on there to try and stay with Balanchine's traditional 1930s definition of what a ballerina is, right? So great. So that basically, the topic is probably more like, you know, ballet and ballet audition requirements, or ballet school audition requirements, specifically the San Francisco Ballet, that that goes along with the Balanchine method, and you know, whether or not that is actually, you know, the best method to use in terms of for audition purposes. Should they be eliminating people based on his vision of what a ballerina should be? Okay, let's look at these questions. I'm hoping you see my screen. I don't know why the scanner was a little bit light on this one, so I apologize for that. But okay, so let me just quickly. I thought it would be quick, but I guess, hold on just a second. All right, so what did you pick for question 1? Does somebody want to read it? I guess I have to read it. Okay, the question says Balanchine would most likely approve of which of the following artistic works. So Balanchine's got to approve of it. So people are picking C, it looks like, at least on my chat box. And C, oh, Kimberly, it looks like somebody else picked, okay. So some people are picking A and some people are picking C. So let's look at the options. So C says a revival of a classic dance in which the storytelling of the chorus is replaced by a group of dancers using only movement to express the dramatic beats of the narrative. Okay, I think that sounds pretty darn good. So somebody else said a modern dance depicting the effects that technology has had on social isolation using modern lighting and projecting techniques to provide context for the dancer's movement. So I don't think he would want modern lighting. He doesn't want, he wants very simplistic. Just if you look back at the passage, he's very simplistic. I don't know which paragraph it's in. Anybody know which paragraph it's in? Where basically you're talking about Balanchine, second paragraph. Okay, great. Let's look at the second paragraph. Nothing to distract from the pure expression of movement, right? So basically, he revised his works to simplify everything but the movement and the music. So he didn't really want like crazy costumes. He didn't want intense lighting scheme. He really just wanted basically the movement and the music. They just wore leotards. They didn't have fancy costumes, and I would presume they didn't have fancy lighting. So I think we can eliminate A. I do think C is the correct, it is the correct answer, but I think it's also the best answer. Sometimes people are sort of tempted by B, but B is speaking about sculptures, and he really never said anything about art or sculptures. And so C is really a the best answer, because we're talking about a dance being revived and we're keeping it as simple as possible, just like Balanchine would have wanted. Okay, number 2, the author would most likely disapprove of which of the following as a basis for a lawsuit. Okay, the author, not Balanchine, but the author would most likely disapprove of which of the following as a basis for a lawsuit. Okay, what did you pick? Take a moment. Ooh, I'm getting a few answers. So somebody says D, somebody says B. Actually, several people say B. So let's look at B first. A highly a highly respected sculpture school refuses to admit any student who is unwilling to invest 6 months in reproducing at least one work of a Renaissance master as part of the application process. D, an artist of Mexican nationality who grew up as an undocumented immigrant in Tucson, sues the Phoenix Art Museum for excluding works by Latino artists in its Voices of the Arizona special exhibit. Well, most people have picked B. B is correct. And the reason is because the author is really concerned about lawsuits resulting in forcing an artistic entity to alter some of what they the ways that they would want to allow for the basically altering the criteria that they're utilizing at for example, I mean, the one they gave in the passage, of course, was ballet, and what the requirements are to allow for auditions and somebody getting in. So I think the best answer is B. It's a highly respected sculpture school refuses to admit any student who's unwilling to invest 6 months in reproducing at least one work. So that's one of their requirements to get into their school. I think D is tempting, but I still think B is a better answer. And also D is talking about, so there isn't, D is not giving anything sort of specific that is preventing the person from applying. Like, it's a little bit more left up to, there's not anything real specific. They're saying that this is just for excluding works by Latino artists. B is a better answer. It's a little bit more in parallel, but D I can see is tempting. Another reason for picking B is that choices A, C, and D also describe a similar discriminatory situation. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is what he's really talking about is art, right? So when we start getting into discrimination, even though it's with an art museum, I think that's a little bit out of the scope of what he was sort of getting at in the article. So I still think B is a better answer than D, and it is the correct answer. So number 3, the passage suggests that, what answers did you pick? I'm seeing both A and D. So the passage suggests that, let's look at A. Had Frederica been rejected from a similar program in another city, no lawsuit would have followed. Well, that is referring to that law that was unique to San Francisco, right? So that sounds like a pretty good answer. Let's look at D. The author believes that tort law in the US has gotten out of hand. Well, this is specifically about San Francisco, and the lawsuit was brought under a law that's San Francisco. I do think that that's again a tempting answer, but I still think A is a better answer because had Frederica been rejected from a similar program in another city, no lawsuit would have followed. That's correct. And so it's really as a result of that unique law in San Francisco that this issue came up. And say that we're talking about law in the US is just too broad. And it's not quite as good of an answer as A within the scope of what the passage actually spoke about. I know at the end of the passage, he does kind of talk about judges not legislating for art groups down here in more general, but in more general terms. But the vast majority of the passage is all about that the repercussions of that one law in San Francisco and that lawsuit that was brought, and sort of the what happened as a result. And then he kind of goes into a more editorial, although that's not really the purpose of the entire passage. So I do think that A is a better answer than D, although I can see where D is tempting. Okay, number 4, the author would most likely agree with which of the following statements. So in this kind of a question, we have to know what the author's opinion is, right? Or the author's tone of the passage is, in order to look at these and try and discern which one we think is the most likely thing that he would agree with. Okay, it looks like everybody picked D, and that is, I think for this question everybody picked D. That's correct. The view of ballet established by George Balanchine is outdated and merits significant revision. That's correct. Okay. Number 5, which of the following arguments most closely parallels the main argument presented by the passage of the author? So it has to parallel the main argument, which means we have to know what the main argument is in order to try and discern what might parallel the main argument presented by the author. Okay, I'm getting D's. I'm getting a couple, maybe 1 or 2 B's. I'm getting a couple A's. All right, so let's look at D first. Oh, I'm getting several. Maybe we should look at A first. A hospital administrator believes that a pharmaceutical company has been engaging in price gouging towards urban hospitals and organizes a class action lawsuit. Okay. Um, I could see maybe where that would be tempting. Let's look at D. A school official argues against instituting a formal dress code with rules and punishments, even though she agrees that some students currently dress in a manner that is unsuitable and that these students' behavior should change. So, we have to, let's try and discern what the author's argument is so that we can better determine between A and D what the right answer is. Anybody want to summarize what the author's real main argument is? I mean, somebody said basically that he, disagrees with how, thinks that some of the things in within the ballet world should change, but also doesn't really think that it should be legislated, or that the judges should be determining what these artistic groups should and shouldn't do. So on the one hand, he's disagreeing that's probably should be modernized, right? Along the lines of kind of Alvin Ailey being so popular is one of the things that he brings up as support for that. But at the same time, he doesn't think that it should be legislated or should be forced upon. So doesn't think the lawsuit should affect artistic expression. Yeah, it shouldn't go about doing their auditions and figuring out who should or shouldn't be allowed in their program. For that, if we talk a bit, once we talk it out, I think the D answer is a better answer. A school official argues against instituting a formal dress code with rules and punishments, even though she agrees that some students currently dress in a manner that is unsuitable and that these students' behavior should change. That sounds an awful lot like what we just said, right? On the one hand, he doesn't he does think that the author does think that probably the ballet world needs to change, but he also doesn't think that it should be legislated or it should be forced upon them by judges. And so in that sense, D is the correct answer. Does that make sense? I'm hoping yes. Okay. Okay, last question, which is number 6. Which one of the following statements made by the author in another publication would most contradict the views expressed? Ooh, okay. So which one of the following statements, if made by the author in another publication? So the author has to contradict himself. So in order to know what the author could say to contradict himself, you have to know what he has said within the article, which we kind of just summarized, right? So it looks like some people are picking C, B, D. There's a lot of possible answers here. This is a kind of a tricky one. Remember, this is something that the author would say that would his argument that he presented in the passage. It has to contradict it. So let's look at all the answer choices. A, Balanchine's view of ballet is outdated. Well, I think we saw that in the passage. But the next part says, and should be revised by lawsuit or threat of lawsuit. I think that pretty clearly contradicts what he's saying here. He doesn't he does not the author does not think that the ballet world should have to be forced to change by lawsuits, by judges, by any legislation, this kind of thing, laws. Um, at the same time, you're right that he does think that the Balanchine's view of ballet is outdated. So that first part correct, but the second part of that does not look very much in line with what the passage says. So that's what it's asking for, is something that contradicts what the passage says. So for me right now, A looks pretty good. Let's look at the other answers. B, both ballroom dance and jazz dance, as media with more variety and fewer restrictions than classical ballet, are ultimately more expressive art forms. I kind of think that's beyond the scope. Like, does that really directly contradict what he said? I mean, not really. It just seems sort of out there, like it's not going to contradict what he said, but doesn't really, it just doesn't contradict it. So that's not what the question is asking. So I think we can eliminate B. C, dancers who join specialized groups such as the Rockettes are often required to have even more strict physical uniformity than the San Francisco Ballet dancers. Okay, that would be adding information to what he's saying, right? That might actually kind of bolster his argument, much like he used Alvin Ailey as an example, right? That on the one, Alvin Ailey is much more popular. They have more body types, all these things. But then, he could use that to support the idea that ballet needs to move forward. But then he could also say, in states like New York, unlike in San Francisco, we have these other companies like the Rockettes that have strict physical uniformity than San Francisco Ballet. That wouldn't be directly contradicting what he says. That's more of a fact, right? He's not saying that's right or wrong, just that they exist, which is true. That's just adding more information, but it's not really contradicting his argument. It's just sort of a fact. So C is not correct. Alvin Ailey was this is D. Alvin Ailey was a much less George Balanchine, but he produced works of higher merit. Well, I might very well agree with that statement, but it's not contradicting what his argument is. What the author's argument is, right? This is where it gets tempting. Like, I personally might agree with D. I don't know. Or some of you may agree with D, but the reality is it's not answering the question, which says, what could the author state that would most contradict his own opinion? So I think D, again, is sort of out of the scope. It's not really going to directly contradict what his argument was. Whereas A, again, if I just read the first part of it, Balanchine's view of ballet is outdated, that doesn't contradict what he already said. But the next part of it definitely does, and should be revised by lawsuit or threat of lawsuit. That's exactly what he's sort of arguing against, right? He does not want any of this to be legislated, or the judges to be able to force artistic rules upon them. Okay, so hopefully we're all okay with A. All right, this next section, the German Empire. I mean, we're really, I guess we're at 4:02, so we're really running out of time. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll post the answers to these. My hope is that the sections that you did for homework were helpful, and then this I think you can see where the ones I had posted first were a little bit easier. I'm not saying they were easy, but they're easier. And then some of these other sections that I posted more recently within the last few days for you guys, they're a little more challenging. So, somebody is asking if Janelle is asking if we can go over this passage. I think we're out of time. I'm only scheduled until 4 o'clock, and I don't want to get into somebody else's time. I went a little over last time, so sorry. What questions should we ask ourselves when we read articles from sources like the New Yorker? Okay, sorry. So this is getting a little more broad. What questions should you ask yourself when you read articles? So when you're reading articles from, say, the New Yorker or the Economist, I think you will, again, ask the same questions that you're asking yourself in these passages, and get used to asking yourself those questions, which are, what is the author's argument? Notice keywords, right? When there's keywords that make it clear that they're trying to persuade you or they're trying to dissuade you, you look for those keywords. Look for words like however, where they're going to start, maybe they presented one argument and then they're going to sort of contradict themselves, which is okay, but we need to know that they're not just married to their one first opinion. They're saying, however, there's this other thing and I need to bring this up. And then how are they dealing with that? Always you want to look at these articles to try and determine what the author is saying, what the author's opinion is, and try and separate yourself from it as much as you can, and just look at the text on the page and what they're trying to tell you. The better you can get at discerning what the argument is as quickly as possible, and some of that is looking at those keywords to find out what the tone of the passage is, the better off you'll be in reading these MCAT passages and having to do it very quickly. I do think in order to improve in these passages, the absolute best thing you can do is do MCAT passages, CARS passages, as regularly as you can. And like I said, start by allowing yourself as much time as you need to really get the answers right and be confident in your answers. Then once you've found yourself being somewhat consistent and getting, not that I'm saying you won't ever get questions wrong, but you'll find that get better at being more consistent in what your answers are, in trying to get the right answers. Once you're more consistent, you can increase the pace, right? But if you try and start at pace and never get accuracy, I'm worried that that the accuracy will never come. So you've really got to start out of pace, meaning to give yourself more time first, and then work your way up to become more accurate. Yeah, ask why did he write this? Look for changes in tone. I'm looking at what people are saying on this. Notice words, look for words like however, what is the author's argument? What is the author saying? Yes, absolutely. So that kind of summarizes what I would say when you're reading articles in The Economist, when you're reading maybe editorial arguments in the New York Times or any other paper. Any of the editorials would probably be good to read because they have an opinion, they have a reason for presenting this. But overall, in order to get yourself used to having to do these inference questions and what do you think the author would most likely agree with, these sorts of questions that you're like, oh man, you've got to not only read the passage, but also consider what the options are and try to look for the option that really summarizes, or at least has the same sort of tone and the same sort of themes as what you saw in the passage. And that's going to take practice. So I do like the idea of reading The Economist, reading editorials in the New York Times, reading the New Yorker, etc. Getting used to this kind of content in terms of reading it quickly, discerning what the arguments are. But honestly, in order to do well on CARS, you've got to do tons of these practice passages and tons of the practice questions. You'll start to see themes, and you'll start to see how you can very quickly eliminate at least one or two of the answers, because usually they're just kind of a little bit out there. A couple of the answers, at least one of them will be really out there if you really understood the passage and took the time to discern the arguments. So if then we can get to the point where we're always able to eliminate down two answer choices, then we've really done ourselves a huge service, because then we only have two more answer choices to discern between. So those are my best thoughts on this. I will post answers to this. I'll also post the answers to the drive-through really fast biochemistry problem set that I posted. And I wish you all the best, and I hope that everybody's MCAT goals are met, and my best hope is for all of you to get into medical school, and I know you all can do it. Just do the best you can to try and stay committed to your goals. And I guess as Mr. Morrison said at the beginning of my session last time, that I once said that my job is to teach and your job is to learn. And I actually was very grateful that he brought that up, because I had almost forgotten that I had said that. Um, Not that I haven't said it since, but I loved hearing that again. And again, what that comes down to is you using your own motivation. You are capable of achieving so much, and you have to put your mind into it and really commit to it. Set some goals for yourself, and one step at a time you accomplish them. And again, my best hope is to see you all in medical school, maybe even at our school. And we do have some MPP graduates at our school, and I'm really happy that some of them came here. So anyway, I can't hear you, but I'm assuming my time is up, and I appreciate all that you're doing, and wish you the best of luck. And I will hopefully get to see you soon. Thank you.